Before William was a conqueror, before he was king, before even the name bastard clung to him like a shadow he could never outrun, there was her. Her name is not carved into triumphal arches or chanted in coronation hymns. But in the dark silence between the thundering pages of medieval chronicles she waits. Her name was Arlette, or Herleva, depending on the scribe. A tanner's daughter, or perhaps a laundress, her lineage remains as foggy as the tides of the Seine. What is certain, what even her enemies could not deny, is that she gave birth to a boy who would one day change the face of Europe. And she did so outside the sanctity of marriage in a world where bloodlines were everything. The court of Falaise must have gasped when Duke Robert of Normandy, a man of brutal charisma and iron ambition, took her not as a wife, but as a lover. Some say it was lust. Others claim a prophecy drove him to her, that a vision had told him his heir would come not from a duchess, but from a woman of the earth. Herleva's womb became sacred by scandal, and the child she bore was a paradox, both a threat and a promise. The chronicles do not linger on her labour, but imagine it. A stone chamber thick with the screams of a woman unworthy of the court's gaze birthing a boy destined to wear a crown. No noble midwife, no chance of welcome, only whispered curses and the knowledge that this child would never be called rightful by those who mattered. The sheets were likely burned, the servants sworn to silence. When William entered the world, he was not wrapped in velvet or gold. He was swaddled in judgment, and yet Arlette did not cower. She remained in the ducal household long after Robert moved on. Not as a courtesan, not as a forgotten fling, but as the mother of his heir. When Robert officially named William as his successor, many nobles balked, scandalized not just by William's bastardry, but by the fact that he had come from her, a woman with no title, no lineage, and no right. And still she stayed. Some historians argue Arlette married later to a man named Herluin de Conteville, a minor noble who accepted her and raised William alongside his own sons. Others suggest the marriage was political fiction, invented to stabilize William's image in later years. What's certain is that William was not erased. He remained in the ducal court under his mother's quiet, iron-bound watch. Even as a child he must have known what people whispered. Bastard, pretender, illegitimate. They said it like a curse, but he wore it like armor. And perhaps that was her doing. Arlette was no noble lady teaching her son to bow and flatter. She was the daughter of sweat and leather, of rivers and blood. She taught him to survive. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, that Arlette once stood before a group of Norman lords and warned them not to underestimate her son, that his blood was hot enough to burn down those who questioned it. Whether true or not, the tale survives because it speaks to the fear she inspired. She had no army, no land, only her son, and she believed in him like a weapon forged in the dark. But belief alone could not protect him. When Duke Robert died suddenly on pilgrimage, William was only 7, a child surrounded by wolves. Instantly the duchy fractured. Rival factions refused to accept a bastard as heir. Assassins prowled the court. Blood stained the corridors. And yet William lived. How some say divine providence. Others credit the web of women nannies, nurses, and above all, his mother who hid him in monasteries, smuggled him through sieges, and whispered lullabies laced with strategy. While noblemen plotted, it was the quiet resilience of women that kept William breathing. There's a silence in the historical record around Arlette during these early years. She disappears from chronicles only to re-emerge decades later when her son has seized Normandy with fire and fear. Some believe she retreated to a convent. Others think she remained in the background, advising, protecting, watching with the patience of someone who knows that power takes time to bloom. One tale persists, though its truth is debated, that when William finally secured his place, when he stood tall amid the wreckage of rebellion, he did not crown himself first. He returned to her, that he took her hand, kissed it before his court, and named her Lady of the Normans. No scribe recorded her reply, but perhaps she said nothing. Perhaps she only looked at him, a quiet flame in her eyes, and thought, "I told you so." The woman history footnotes as a mistress was in many ways a queen-maker. She bore the scandal, the whispers, the blood, and she raised a boy the world called bastard, into a man who would one day dare to be king. They called her Arlette, but to the court of Normandy, she was known by crueler names. Her laver, the tanner's daughter, the commoner who opened her legs for a duke. In the folds of medieval memory, her story was folded in shame, as if nobility could only be born through velvet sheets and God-sanctioned vows. But heresy often wears a human face, and Arlette's was young, defiant, and quietly dangerous. She lived in Falaise, a town not yet famous, nestled among limestone cliffs and the scent of fresh hides. Her father worked with leather. Some say he was a tanner, others a currier or furrier, but the distinction meant little to the nobility who gagged at the stench of industry. Even from birth she belonged to a caste of the unclean. Her presence in a duke's bedchamber was not only scandal, it was a disruption of divine order. And yet Robert the Magnificent saw her. They say she danced in the courtyard, barefoot, hair loose like a wild flame. Others claim she was washing linen in the river when he rode by his gaze, snagged by her arms glistening with soap and sunlight. It may have been lust or love or boredom. What it became was legend. A duke descended from Viking kings, choosing a peasant girl as his concubine. To the court it was heresy, to the church it was sin, to the people it was prophecy. For in her belly within weeks grew a child, and that child, some whispered, would change the world. Arlette was never Robert's wife. Their union was not blessed, but she was brought into the ducal household, given rooms within the stone fortress of Falaise. Not as a maid, not as a prisoner, as something else, something unspoken. A mistress, yes, but also a vessel. Her value no longer lay in her name or her station, but in the blood forming inside her. She was watched, judged, isolated, not by chains, but by glances that cut like blades. The noblewomen scorned her murmuring as they passed. The priests looked at her belly and saw ruin, and yet she held her head high. She ate at the duke's table. She touched her swollen stomach in full view of the court. One chronicle suggests she wore crimson on the day she first appeared with Robert, her hands bare of rings, her waist untethered by modesty. Crimson, the colour of shame or sacrifice. That same chronicle accuses her of witchcraft, of placing herbs beneath her tongue to seduce a duke. But such accusations, common in the mouths of jealous men, say more about their fear than her power. When William was born, Arlette named him Guillaume, a name with roots in war and will. She did not hide him. She did not hand him off to a wet nurse and disappear. She stayed, and the court, though it snarled in private, did not dare expel her. Because Robert, brash, defiant, unpredictable, had named her his choice. Yet the deeper scandal was not that she bore his child. It was that Robert refused to have any other. He never married, never produced a legitimate heir. His ducal line would live or die through Arlette. Some historians argue that Robert's decision was tactical, that a noble marriage would have complicated his volatile rule. Others believe it was pride that he loved her enough to defy custom. And some whisper that Arlette held sway over him, not with spells, but with silence. That she said less and listened more, and in that silence, she understood men better than their wives did. Still, not everyone accepted her place. When Robert left on pilgrimage, intending never to return, he declared the 8-year-old William his heir. The nobility choked, a bastard. A child born of a woman whose father stank of flesh and lime. One count is said to have spat on the floor in protest, but Robert did not flinch. And Arlette, though not present at court, not seen publicly again for some time, had already done her part. She had survived the court's disdain. She had borne the heir, and perhaps more quietly, she had made allies, because William was not killed. He was not abandoned. Despite the bloodshed that followed, he lived. The web that kept him safe may have had her hands at its centre. Her later marriage to William de Conqueror, a knight of middling status, might seem like a step down, but it brought her back into the nobility's good graces. With him, she bore more children, among them Odo of Bayeux, who would later wield vast power in the new kingdom her first son would carve. What is strange, what haunts the historical record, is the silence that follows her. After giving Normandy its future, Arlette fades. No letters, no portraits, no tomb to weep at. Some believe she entered a convent cloistered away from the politics her womb had set in motion. Others insist she stayed close to power, disguised as a mere wife, her voice passed down through her sons. A few even whisper that she died suddenly poisoned by those who feared what she might yet do. But the truth is unknown, and in that void myth thrives. Her legacy is not inked in stone, but sewn into the fabric of Norman destiny. She was a woman whose name became synonymous with scandal, whose body became the battlefield on which a dynasty was built. She loved a duke, or seduced him, or was chosen by fate. It no longer matters. What matters is that from her came the bastard who would one day burn England to the ground and rebuild it in his image. And when they crowned him king, they did not speak her name. But somewhere in the silence of that moment, heresy was vindicated. The castle of Falaise, once his sanctuary, shifts overnight into a cage of whispers and watchful eyes. His father, Duke Robert of Normandy, is dead. Gone, they say, in the Holy Land, struck down by illness or divine retribution, depending on who tells the story. But all that matters now is this William, a child born on the wrong side of the sheets, is declared heir to a duchy teetering on the edge of civil war. He is not yet 10, and already men want him dead. In the great halls where armoured lords once knelt to his father, William walks as a shadow tolerated, not welcomed. His legitimacy is a paper-thin veil held up only by his father's last command. The Dukes of Normandy descended from Viking raiders, and Christian kings do not kneel easily, and certainly not to a bastard boy birthed by a commoner. His mother is gone now, retreated into marriage, or silence, no longer able to guard him from blades in the dark. He is placed in the care of guardians one after another, each appointed by the court, each dying in quick succession. Some are murdered in their sleep. Others fall to fevers that arrive suspiciously soon after they've sworn to protect him. The child survives not because of alliances, but because of absence. He is hidden, moved from manor to monastery, fed under candlelight and guarded by monks who speak little and pray too much. There are nights when he doesn't sleep, only listens to hoofbeats in the distance, to the scrape of iron against stone, to the breathless silence before a scream. This is how he learns to rule, not from books, not from tutors, but from terror. Some say he is sent to the Abbey of Bec, others to the fortress of Ivry. The records contradict each other or vanish altogether. A deliberate erasure, some historians suggest, meant to protect him even centuries later. What is certain is that the duchy falls into chaos. Rival lords claim cities. Families slaughter one another over scraps of land. Peasants starve while nobles feast. And through it all, the boy walks unseen. And yet strangely he learns to trust no one, not even those who swear loyalty. He watches them die too quickly, or betray too easily. There is a story whispered by chroniclers and embroidered over time that one night when William is perhaps 11, a maid sneaks into his chambers with a bundle wrapped in cloth. Bread. A gift. No, inside is a dagger, not meant for him but meant with him. The woman presses it into his hands and says only, "If they come, don't scream. Use this." He never sees her again. As he grows, so too does the violence. At 13, he witnesses the beheading of a supporter on the castle steps. The man's head is paraded on a pike, the mouth still frozen in mid-prayer. William does not flinch. The court watches him closely, expecting tears, but he only turns and walks back inside. By 15, he is taller, broader. His eyes, once soft with boyish fear, are sharp, calculating. He has learned the value of silence. He listens more than he speaks. And when he speaks, it is with precision, his mother's gift. Though she is no longer by his side, her presence lingers. In letters, perhaps. In secret visits, maybe. Some say she sent him herbs to cure his fevers. Others claim she bribed knights to defend his name. And some believe she watched him from the shadows during court ceremonies, veiled and wordless, her gaze as sharp as any sword. But no woman is allowed to rule in his name. Instead, the court places him under the tutelage of powerful men, most of whom want him pliable, quiet, easily removed if needed. He does not give them the satisfaction. He learns to ride, to hunt, to strategize. His bastard birth becomes his crucible. And with each passing year, the boy begins to vanish, and the conqueror starts to form. Still, scandal clings to him like a second skin. He is mocked behind closed doors. The bastard of Flanders, they whisper. He hears it in the tones of servants, in the snide remarks of distant cousins, in the reluctant bows of vassals forced to swear fealty to a boy they do not respect. One noble Guy of Burgundy will one day rise in full rebellion, citing William's illegitimacy as both insult and justification. But William, though young, knows that bloodlines are a game, and he has no interest in playing fair. At 16, he begins to fight back, not with an army, not yet, but with cunning. He calls together advisors, he tests loyalties, he cultivates the church's favour, offering gifts, land, and allegiance to bishops in exchange for quiet declarations of legitimacy. The church, always hungry for kings in need, obliges, and yet nothing is certain. Some argue that William never truly trusted anyone again after those early years, that the betrayal of his guardians carved into him a belief trust is a luxury for the legitimate. Bastards must rule with suspicion. Others argue that his later love for his wife proves otherwise, that within the cold fortress of his ambition, a human heart still beat. What is not debated is this: William survived. Where other boys would have been forgotten, erased, exiled, executed, he endured. Not by divine right, not by title, but because somewhere beneath the boy, a blade had already begun to sharpen. And if you listen closely in the empty halls of Falaise, you might still hear the footsteps of a child who walked alone and never forgot what it cost him to live. Power does not rise from the earth clean. It drags with it blood bodies, and those who were never meant to be part of the story. And as William claws his way toward control of Normandy, it is not only men who fall in his wake. Women, forgotten, nameless and silenced, die for the throne he is yet to sit upon. The duchy is fracturing. In the vacuum left by Robert's death, noble families tear into one another like starving wolves. Castles burn. Roads become hunting grounds. Even churches, once sanctuaries, no longer shield the vulnerable. And within this chaos, women are used like currency, traded, captured or crushed beneath ambition not their own. A young noblewoman, Elizabeth of Mortain, is betrothed to one of William's allies. She is barely 15. When rebels storm her husband's keep, they slaughter every male within the walls, but her fate is worse. She is dragged before a crowd, paraded as a symbol of submission, and then without trial thrown into a well. The water swallows her, but not the horror. No chronicle names her killer, no justice follows, but William never forgets. There are dozens like her. Daughters of lords who backed the wrong side. Sisters taken hostage. Servant girls accused of espionage and hanged in silence. Their stories do not appear in the grand histories of the conquest, but they are buried in footnotes, in fragments of letters, in the bones found beneath collapsed towers. One of the bloodiest of these uprisings comes in 1047, the rebellion of the Western Lords. Led by William's cousin Guy of Burgundy, the rebellion is more than a military threat. It is personal. Guy, a noble born of pure blood, sees William's rise as an insult, a stain. A bastard ruling Normandy is to him an affront to God. He gathers allies and begins a campaign of terror. Castles are seized, monasteries ransacked, and towns that pledge loyalty to William are razed. Women within these towns suffer quietly, violated, exiled, disappeared. Some are used to manipulate their fathers or brothers. Others are burned alongside their homes. In one village, it is said the entire convent of Saint-Hilaire is set ablaze after the abbess refuses to turn over her land to rebel forces. 15 nuns locked inside singing hymns as the flames rise. The smoke reaches the walls of Caen by morning. William, barely 20, rides to suppress the rebellion not only with swords but with vengeance. His tactics are brutal, efficient. He lays siege to Guy's strongholds, isolates his allies, and ultimately crushes the uprising at the Battle of Val-es-Dunes. The river runs red, the rebellion dies. But so do many of the women who had no say in it. Some historians argue that William's response to the rebellion marks his transition from a wary youth into a hardened ruler. That the blood spilled in the name of survival turned into blood spilled for dominance. Others believe the rebellion merely confirmed what he already knew, that power cannot afford mercy. And somewhere behind him, always behind, moved the shadows of women who did not choose this war. There is the Lady of Saint-Lô, who opened her gates to William's army and was executed by the rebels in retaliation. There is the midwife of Rouen, accused of spying, who vanished one night after tending to a noblewoman's labour. And there is the chambermaid of Falaise, some say a distant cousin of William's mother, who was drowned by noble hands for daring to speak in the boy duke's favour. Their names are uncertain, their stories tangled in rumour, but they are real. Women who carried the weight of someone else's ambition and whose deaths paved the road to William's throne. And yet, even amid the violence, there are women who choose, who step into the chaos with open eyes. One tale survives of a lady named Almodis, who poisons her own husband to prevent him from defecting to the rebels. When confronted, she does not deny it. He would have betrayed our duke, she says, before being exiled to a nunnery. There she lives out the rest of her days, unrepentant, reciting prayers to a God she does not fear. Was she a murderer? A patriot? A wife defending her household? The truth is not clear. But William sends her food and coin every year until her death. Some believe he saw his mother in her, because even in the wreckage of Normandy, even among the bodies and ashes, William does not forget where he came from. A woman had given him life, and others had given him power, whether by choice or by force. The men who opposed him are remembered in chronicles, their names etched into war poems and genealogies. But the women who bled for his rise, they remain ghosts, and perhaps that is fitting, for William himself would one day become a ghost to the land he conquered, a shadow of fear of inevitability. But in Normandy, their absence lingers louder than his presence. The boy with no father did not climb alone. He stepped on the backs of those who never had the choice to stand. In the cloistered stone corridors of the Abbey of Caen, a woman writes by candlelight. Her name is unknown to most. Perhaps she is Sister Marie, or Sister Alice, or no name at all, only the scribe. She is veiled, bound to silence, but her ink speaks what her lips cannot. Her manuscript, found centuries later tucked inside the bindings of an unrelated text, contains not scripture, but visions, dreams, strange accounts of a young Duke of Storms and iron birds of crowns bleeding, and queens with black mouths. Historians scoff. They call it medieval mysticism, the babblings of a cloistered mind. But others wonder, was she mad? Or did she know something she should not have? The nunnery at Caen was more than a sanctuary. It was a crucible of power, one of the many religious houses established or funded by William's family, meant to purify legacy through stone and prayer. William would later build 2 great abbeys here, one for men, one for women, supposedly as penance for marrying within forbidden kinship lines. But long before that, before the conquest, before the blood-soaked coronation, there were already women in Caen watching. The nun's writings begin in the 1040s, when William is still just a battered duke fighting to hold Normandy together. Her tone is solemn, unnervingly specific. One passage reads, "He walks among fire and wolves with a serpent in his mouth. The throne is not yet carved, but it waits for him beneath foreign stars." Some dismiss it as allegory, but the details are troubling. She names places William will not reach for another decade. She describes England as a crowned widow long before Edward the Confessor's death, makes that metaphor real. Some believe her visions were shared in secret with high-ranking clergymen, who used them to secure alliances or justify war. Others claim her manuscript was hidden because it foretold too much, because it suggested that William's rise was not divine but engineered. The abbey where she writes is home to dozens of women, many daughters of nobles sent there not by vocation, but by strategy. The cloister is quiet, yes, but not blind. These women hear news. They see the bruises on visiting wives, the fear in messengers' eyes. They copy letters, transcribe histories, and bury warnings within illuminated margins. One such margin shows a crowned figure with a bleeding mouth, and a woman kneeling beside him, her face turned away. A subtle detail easily dismissed as decoration. Unless you know what to look for, the ink used for the blood is rare vermilion mixed with crushed lapis, reserved for saints or for secrets. For some scholars speculate that this nun once lived in the court of Falaise, that she may have known Arlette, that she may have seen the birth of William with her own eyes and was silenced thereafter. A nursemaid turned nun, a witness turned prophetess. It is of course theory, but theory has its teeth. One surviving document from the abbey records a reprimand. "The sister shall cease her nightly scribblings, for they do not glorify the Lord, but conjure unrest. It is unsigned. Dated around 1050. The same year William begins courting the woman who would change his fate forever, Matilda of Flanders. Whether the nun wrote of Matilda is uncertain. But one chilling passage near the manuscript's end speaks of a woman who binds the lion with thread and salt, an image that some interpret as a warning, others as a curse. And then silence. No final entry. No note of illness or death. Her manuscript ends mid-sentence. She carried the crown not on her brow, but in her. The page is torn or removed. Some believe she was buried within the abbey walls, a quiet interment without ceremony. Others think she was taken elsewhere, locked away in another house her visions deemed too dangerous. A few romantics claim she escaped, living out her days as a hermit along the coast, where sailors came to her for blessings she never gave. But the words she left behind refused to die. In the centuries that followed, the manuscript re-emerged in fragments used to bind books, reinforce bindings, or insulate scrolls. Every time it appeared, it carried with it the same chill, as if the woman behind the ink had not vanished, only waited. For someone to read, to see, to understand that history is not made by kings alone, but by those who see too clearly and speak too soon. William never speaks of the nun, at least not in any surviving record, but he does fund her abbey lavishly after his marriage. He ensures the nuns live in comfort, that their walls are strong, their bells polish their cloisters, echoing with prayer. Some say it is piety, others suspect guilt, for the woman who foresaw the lion in fire and foretold the widow's crown. The silence she left behind grows louder with every conquest William claims. When William first seeks her hand, she refuses him. Matilda of Flanders is no peasant girl. She is the daughter of Baldwin the Count of Flanders, a regent of immense wealth and prestige, and Adela of France herself, a royal princess. Matilda is born into silk and strategy, educated, multilingual. She reads Latin, rides horses like a knight, and governs her father's court in his absence. She is not a pawn. She is an heirloom wrapped in iron. So when a bastard from Normandy, no matter how fierce, no matter how promising, sends messengers asking for her hand, she replies not with hesitation, but with scorn. She is said to have spat on the proposal. Me, a daughter of kings, marry the bastard of Falaise. The court laughs with her. And so the answer returns to William. A woman of her lineage does not stoop for a boy born in sin. But William does not accept defeat. What happens next is a story historians cannot agree upon. Some claim it is myth. Others swear it was whispered in the halls of Caen for decades. The version that endures is this. William rides to Bruges unannounced and uninvited. He finds Matilda in the street, descending from her horse. And without ceremony, without a word, he grabs her by the hair, drags her into the mud, and throws her to the ground. Silence follows. No duel, no outrage, no royal guards rushing in. Only Matilda stunned not by violence but by audacity. The bastard has dared to touch her not as a suitor but as an equal, or perhaps as a challenge. In the weeks that follow, the court expects war. Instead, Matilda sends word she will marry him. No apology, no grovelling, simply a shift, like weather changing direction. To this day, historians debate the story. Some believe it was fabricated to dramatize a political alliance. Others suggest it reflects a truth the chronicles cannot say aloud, that Matilda was not coerced, but provoked. That in William, she saw a man not unlike herself, unyielding, bruised by birth but unbent. Their marriage will become one of the most formidable partnerships of the medieval age. But in this moment, the court reels. The Pope is aghast. William and Matilda are too closely related, canonically speaking, perhaps third or fourth cousins. The Church, always hungry for reasons to exert control, condemns the union. A papal ban is issued. The couple is excommunicated. But they marry anyway. Whether out of love, pride, or the shared hunger for power, they go to the altar, knowing it may cost them everything. William gains more than a bride. He gains the wealth and prestige of Flanders. Matilda gains more than a husband. She steps into a dukedom forged in war, ready to rule it. Some noble women call her reckless, others call her cursed, but Matilda does not flinch. On her wedding night, she is said to have worn blue, not the colour of virginity, but of sovereignty. Her dowry includes not only gold and land, but a host of retainers, Flemish knights, whose allegiance will bolster William's fragile court. In the years that follow, Matilda will birth at least 9 children, perhaps 10, depending on which chronicles you believe. Some will die young, some will become kings, one will rebel. But in this union, Matilda does not vanish into motherhood. She governs Normandy when William is away. She signs charters, commands armies, presides over courts. But before any of that, there is this moment, this scandal. A princess refusing a bastard refusing to be refused. In their courtship lies a foreshadowing of conquest, nothing given, everything taken. And beneath the scandal, something rarer, recognition. 2 people shaped by different wounds, staring across the ruins of protocol and seeing perhaps themselves. There is another story, softer but stranger. It is said that before her marriage, Matilda fasted for 3 days and confessed to a nun in Ghent. That she asked whether marrying William would damn her soul. The nun, according to legend, said only even a bastard can become a sword of God. But a sword draws blood. Matilda marries him anyway. She steps into a duchy splintered by rebellion, into a marriage condemned by the Pope, into a life marked by war, and never looks back. The ban will eventually be lifted, of course. Politics bends for power. The Pope, lured by gifts, and the promise of loyal vassals, absolves the union. But the stain remains. Even after they are crowned in England, some call her the bastard's whore. Others call her queen. And Matilda, like her husband, learns to wear both names as armour. While William scours his rebellious lands, raising armies and crushing insurrections, Matilda rules. Not from the shadows, not as a placeholder, but with the full weight of authority. She is Duchess in title, sovereign in action. Her seal adorns documents. Her decrees are law. Her judgment final. Some say she governs better than he does. In the stone halls of Rouen and Caen, she holds court draped in sober silks, her hair veiled and braided in gold thread. She is not warm. She does not coo to petitioners or charm with honeyed words. She listens with stillness, speaks only when the silence grows sharp, and her decisions cut with the precision of a blade honed in solitude. Even William's fiercest barons bow to her authority, not for love but for fear. Because Matilda does not ask, she expects. Behind closed doors, she writes. Letters to Rome, to Flanders, to English abbots and Norman knights. Letters with subtle threats and elegant flattery, all in her own hand. She is a woman fluent in power, and she wields it like a scalpel, precise, deliberate, never more than needed. But she is not merely the keeper of William's house. She becomes the soul of his legacy. While he campaigns through Brittany, through Maine, and toward the English Channel, it is Matilda who keeps the court from splintering. It is she who smooths alliances with neighbouring lords, arranges betrothals for her children, soothes the egos of ambitious cousins and pious monks. Every rising threat is met with the quiet, watchful gaze of a woman whose throne is held not by birthright, but by endurance. There is a monastery in Caen, built by her order, the Abbé aux Dames. Its foundation stone is laid by Matilda herself. She walks barefoot across the cold earth, flanked by nuns and nobles alike, to dedicate it to the Virgin Mary. But the abbey is more than piety. It is politics, an offering to Rome, a symbol of legitimacy for her marriage, a statement. This land, this house, this name, I hold them all, and I will make them sacred. Some claim she even oversees the masons and the plans herself. That she reviews the drafts, suggests changes, ensures the design reflects both heaven and Normandy. Even in prayer, Matilda remains sovereign. But power has a cost. She is not always beloved. The chroniclers paint her in blurred strokes, some as holy, others as ruthless. She is too educated, too commanding, too involved. She rides horses like a man. She speaks her mind before bishops. She is never caught weeping. And so the rumours begin, that she scorns the other ladies at court, that she disciplines her children with iron rules, that she once cursed a servant into madness. None of it proven, all of it whispered. Even her motherhood is questioned. She gives birth again and again, sons, daughters, names that will fill dynasties, but she is not the soft sacrificing ideal. She does not disappear into the nursery, she delegates. She commands wet nurses and tutors and expects loyalty, not devotion. To her, motherhood is dynasty, not sentiment. Some historians believe this is the root of her later sorrow, that a woman who raises kings must also raise rebellion. But that is not yet. For now, in the years before Hastings, she stands firm. It is said that when William leaves for his fateful campaign across the Channel, he kneels before her, not as a husband to a wife, but as a knight to his queen. He places his ducal ring in her hand and asks her to guard his realm. Not Normandy, their Normandy. She governs during his absence with such efficiency that little rebellion stirs. Taxes are collected, castles maintained, roads guarded, priests paid, all in the name of the man across the sea, and the woman who holds what he leaves behind. But Matilda does more than preserve. She builds. She expands the Abbey Commission's manuscripts and lays plans for the new Norman court, one that will straddle two worlds if William succeeds. And when the letters come describing ships crossing the Channel and swords drawn on English soil, Matilda does not pray for safety. She prepares for rule. Still, there are nights, at least the stories say, when she walks the upper corridors of Caen alone. When the candles burn low and the court is silent, a figure in velvet and pearls staring into the dark, listening for a wind from the west, waiting to know if she will be crowned queen or widow. The ships return with blood in their sails and fire in their bellies. England has fallen. William is king. But before the crown rests on his head, it is Matilda who feels its weight. She waits in Caen dressed in twilight silks, surrounded by the cold breath of winter and the faint chant of nuns from the abbey below. Word spreads slowly like smoke through a cathedral. First the landing at Pevensey, then the march, then Hastings, and finally, Harold's death. The Saxon king struck through the eye like a fated omen sprawled on the battlefield as vultures circle above. The Norman banners rise not with celebration, but with gravity. A crown seized by force must be secured by fear. Some say William sends his heralds to Rome to beg for papal blessing. Others whisper that it is Matilda who negotiates quietly, behind the veil, reminding the Church of Normandy's piety of her abbey, her donations, her noble bloodline. Normandy is not some warlord's den, it is a sanctified court. And now it will stretch its fingers across the Channel. Still, William delays Matilda's crossing. He does not call her to his side immediately. England is raw wounded, watching. Saxon lords mutter in their stone halls. Rebellions bubble beneath the surface. The new king needs to build his dominion before presenting his queen. And so Matilda waits not with patience, but with calculation. She sends emissaries, oversees the rule in Normandy, tends to their younger children, and prepares silently, steadily for her coronation. It comes in 1068, 2 years after Hastings, when the fires of resistance have cooled and the smoke of conquest has begun to clear. Matilda sails to England, her entourage trailing behind like silk in water. She lands not as a visitor, but as a sovereign. The coronation is held in Westminster Abbey, the same hallowed space where kings have prayed, knelt, bled. She ascends the steps not like a bride, but like a warrior returned from battle unseen. The chroniclers record the grandeur golden robes, candlelight dripping from vaulted arches, incense heavy in the air. But beneath the veils and Latin chants, something quieter stirs an ancient tension. For here stands a woman not born of England, not crowned by love but by power. A foreign queen for a conquered people. Still she is crowned Regina Anglorum, Queen of the English, not queen consort, not duchess abroad, but a ruler in her own right. Some believe this was William's final tribute to her, a way of saying, "You have held my house, my land, my name. Now hold my throne." Others argue it was political theatre, a symbol to pacify the English, to show continuity where there was rupture. Matilda, with her noble lineage and devout piety, offered a softer mask to conquest. But the truth, as always, lies somewhere in the silence between fact and belief. In her first years as queen, Matilda walks a delicate blade. The Saxon nobles do not trust her. The Norman barons do not revere her. She rules not with popularity, but with unshakable poise. She funds churches, restores monasteries, supports the poor, all while keeping her court deeply, unmistakably Norman. It is said that when she visits old Saxon strongholds, she never flinches at the glares. She simply offers her hand to be kissed, her gaze unwavering. She speaks little in public, but when she does, her Latin is flawless. her tone clipped like the blade of a sword drawn from velvet. There is one curious tale from this time, half legend, half echo, that she once met with the widow of King Harold. That the two women sat across from each other in a grey hall, neither touching food nor wine. That they did not speak of war or loss or betrayal, but simply stared at one another as two queens might, one who had everything taken and one who had taken everything. Nothing was recorded of what they said, only that when Matilda left the room, her fingers were trembling. It is during this reign that Matilda's true legacy begins to shimmer into view, not as a conqueror's wife, but as a builder of realms. She sponsors scholars, sends her sons to learn in distant courts, oversees the repairs of war-torn churches, and quietly, ever so quietly, begins the weaving of a new Anglo-Norman identity, one stitched with the thread of diplomacy and lineage. But not all is triumph. William grows harsher. The rebellions drag on. The king's eyes narrow with age and suspicion. And Matilda, once the calming anchor of their union, begins to drift from his reach. Their love remains, but it frays at the edges. Some say it is because she disagrees with his violence in the north, the infamous harrying of the north, where entire villages are razed, crops burned, innocents starved to death to crush rebellion. Others claim it is their sons who divide them, especially Robert, the eldest, proud and brash. More Saxon than Norman in temperament, yet his bloodline makes him heir. William grows impatient with him. Robert wants more. And Matilda, perhaps out of maternal guilt, perhaps out of political foresight, takes her son's side again and again. Whispers stir through the stone corridors that the queen and the heir hold councils without the king. That William finds out. That something cracks beneath the surface of their rule. But for now, she is still queen, still seated at the high table, still signing charters, still wearing her crown, not as ornament, but as armour. And when she walks the cloisters of Westminster or Caen robes rustling eyes unreadable, even her enemies cannot deny this truth. Matilda is no one's shadow. She is a sovereign in her own right, the iron thread that binds two kingdoms, the queen of the conquered and the conqueror alike. The silence between mother and son can be heavier than war drums. Robert, eldest son of Matilda and William, had once been the sun around which his mother's hopes orbited. He was born in exile, raised in expectation, and praised by Matilda with the quiet ferocity of a mother who saw in him not only a prince, but a sovereign to eclipse his father. He was bold, too bold. Even as a young man, Robert defied his tutors, questioned his father, and surrounded himself with young Norman nobles eager for favour. He was brave in battle and charismatic in court, but lacked the restraint his father wielded like a blade. What William built with discipline, Robert wanted to claim by right. Some say Matilda encouraged this, that she whispered to her son of his destiny, that she compared him to his grandfather Baldwin, to Charlemagne, to Arthur of old. Others argue she simply loved too blindly, saw too much of herself in him, and too little of his father. The fracture deepens during a campaign in Brittany. A squabble over command, a perceived slight. Robert storms off furious. William refuses to yield. And Matilda, caught between the two men who define her life, is forced to choose. She writes to Robert in secret, sends him money horses and quiet encouragement. When William learns of this, he is livid. The chroniclers tell us the king confronted his queen. His voice thundered. He called her disloyal. She stood her ground. There were no tears, no apologies, just a silence that felt like a closing door. In 1077, the worst comes. Robert launches a rebellion, not in some distant land, but against his own father. The boy Matilda nursed the son she clothed in silk and ambition, now rides against the man she once called her only equal. The Battle of Gerberoy is small but vicious. And there in the chaos of blood and iron, father and son meet sword to sword. Some say Robert unhorses William, that the old king lies sprawled in the mud as his son rides past victorious. Others claim no such duel occurred, that it was rumour fed by the shame William carried for months after. But Matilda knew, whatever happened on that field, something broke that day, in her husband, in her son, in herself. The aftermath is cold. William retreats in humiliation. Robert flees to Flanders. Matilda, once the fulcrum of their unity, becomes the ghost between them. She pleads for reconciliation, writes again, sends emissaries, but neither man will yield. And the queen, so long the architect of peace, now watches as her house splinters. The court begins to change. William surrounds himself with harder men, fewer women. The laughter fades from the halls. The younger sons, William, Rufus, and Henry, eye the empty space their brother left behind with sharp, calculating stares. Matilda grows quieter. Her public appearances fewer. She turns increasingly toward her abbeys, her sacred havens in Caen and La Trinité. There, cloaked in ritual and stone, she finds fleeting peace. Some say she begins fasting more, spending nights in vigil, praying not just for Normandy and England, but for her soul. Others believe she retreats because she knows what's coming, that the boy she raised to rule would never wear a crown in peace. That ambition had devoured him, that in her pursuit to shape a king, she had made a man who could not wait to inherit. And yet through all of this, she never disowns him. She continues to write, to send aid, to argue with William on Robert's behalf, to hope even when history whispers its cruel patterns. One letter from this time, though, likely apocryphal, has haunted historians for centuries. It begins simply, "My son, you were born in shadow and raised in fire, but I would still burn to keep you warm." Whether those words passed from her pen or not, they capture a truth deeper than parchment. Matilda never stopped being a mother, and perhaps that was her greatest flaw. In a world ruled by conquest and succession, by power and lineage, she chose love again and again, even when it tore her kingdom apart. In 1080, a fragile truce is reached. Robert returns to court. There are smiles, public displays of peace. Matilda watches it all with eyes that no longer shine like they once did. She has won the battle between father and son, but the war within herself is lost. Because nothing is as it was. Not the marriage, not the crown, not the boy who once called her maman beneath cathedral arches. And in her quiet chambers, as the candles flicker lower and lower, Matilda begins to feel the chill of her own decline. The queen who once bound 2 kingdoms with grace and steel now finds herself watching the unraveling of both helpless, silent, haunted by love. It begins as many endings do, with a lingering cough. The courtiers don't speak of it aloud at first. Whispers bloom like frost in the corridors of Caen. The queen has taken to her bed more often. She no longer presides over the abbey's affairs with her old fire. Her appetite wanes. Her once flawless posture now bends with the weight of breathlessness. And yet Matilda hides it. She continues her work, signing documents with elegant strokes, inspecting the embroidery of altar cloths, dictating letters in a voice that still carries authority, even as it fades with each sentence. She refuses to let the court see her unravel. To the end, she remains a sovereign of 2 worlds, sacred and political, maternal and imperial. William visits her often, though not as he once did. The days of quiet laughter and shared counsel are long gone. Now their conversations are clipped heavy with the residue of old quarrels and unspoken grief. He sits at her side, his armor removed, his hands rough with age. She looks at him with eyes that have loved and judged, forgiven and remembered. They speak of Robert only in careful phrases, of Normandy always, of God frequently, of their youth never. In the abbey she founded La Trinité, Matilda begins to prepare, not just for death, but for legacy. She dictates a final will, ensures that her dowry lands will be protected, requests prayers be said for her soul for 30 days after her passing, asks for burial, not in grandeur, but in the stone floor of the abbey church, beneath a slab bearing her name, her lineage, and nothing else. There is dignity in this exit, but also defiance. Even dying Matilda remains the architect of her own story. Some chroniclers claim her final days were spent in silence, gazing out over the gardens of the convent, clutching a relic of the Virgin. Others say she spoke to the nuns daily, offering instructions for feast days, long after she would be gone. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. What is certain is this: on November 2nd, 1083, Queen Matilda of Flanders, Duchess of Normandy, Queen of England, patron of abbeys, mother of kings, draws her last breath. William is not with her. Whether he is at war or simply too proud to watch her go, no one knows for certain. Some say he rushed to her side too late, collapsing by her body in grief. Others insist he mourned in private, alone in a chapel, refusing all comfort. What we do know is that her death breaks something in him. The Iron King, who had never been bested in battle, begins to wither. His conquests feel hollow, his crown heavier, his court darker. He lashes out more frequently, grows paranoid, eats too much, sleeps too little, and above all, he never speaks her name in public again. The funeral is magnificent, a queen's burial, yet not without scandal. When her body is placed in the tomb at Caen, the bishop begins the rites, but a local citizen interrupts. He claims the land beneath the abbey was wrongfully taken from him by the crown, that burying Matilda there would be a sacrilege. The entire procession halts. Gasps echo through the nave. Only after the bishop pays the man off, then and there does the ceremony continue. It is a final echo of the struggles that defined Matilda's life. Even in death, the balance of power and justice teeters above her like a sword. The slab that seals her tomb is simple as she wished. No effigy, no sculpture, only words. Here lies the body of Matilda, daughter of Baldwin, wife of William, Queen of the English, and beneath those words, silence. Yet her story refuses to stay buried. The abbey she founded becomes a place of pilgrimage. Women come to pray at her tomb, not just for children, but for strength, for courage, for memory. Monks write of her intellect. Bishops recall her mercy. Her daughters found their own abbeys in her name. Even Robert, exiled and adrift, writes a letter in shaky Latin years later, referring to her as Mater Regina Mea, my queen mother. Still, she becomes a ghost in history, overshadowed by her husband's brutal legend, dwarfed by her son's rebellion, flattened into a consort in the chronicles of conquest. But if one listens closely beneath the clang of swords, beyond the clangor of war, her voice remains, not loud, not boastful, but unyielding. In every treaty she brokered, every girl she educated, every abbey she built stone by stone, she is there, a queen not just of crowns but of consequence. And perhaps in that quiet final winter, as candlelight danced on the cold walls of Caen, she knew that legacy was not forged in iron, but in whispers that never stop echoing. Matilda is gone, and with her, the invisible thread that once bound William to restraint begins to fray. He survives her by 4 years, but they are not kind years. The fire that once burned in the Conqueror now flickers erratically. His victories are fewer, his patience shorter, his cruelty sharpened like a blade held too long. The court grows sombre in her absence. Her ladies scatter her charitable effort stall, and even the abbey she built sinks into quiet mourning. The queen's presence had been the balm, the breath, the balancing weight to her husband's fury. Now, with no one to hold him in check, the lion turns inward. William is aging badly. His girth expands, and with it his temper. Chroniclers write of him snapping at bishops and berating his sons. His enemies multiply not just abroad, but within his own house. The once vibrant court of Normandy becomes a place of suspicion and surveillance, and always the question of Robert. The rift between father and son widens into a chasm. Robert still rules in Normandy in name, if not in full authority, having taken control of several key castles during Matilda's illness. He now styles himself independently, issuing commands as though the old king were already buried. William, for all his rage, does not strike at once. Perhaps Matilda's death has dulled him, or perhaps some part of him remembers the way she used to plead for Robert's inclusion, how she once said, "A kingdom divided against its children is a curse on the house that built it." Some historians believe William secretly hoped to reconcile with his son before death reunite the realms under one crown. Others argue he never intended to forgive him, that he meant to disinherit Robert entirely, even at the cost of chaos. What is not debated is this: he never sees his eldest son again. Instead, William places his trust in his younger sons, William, Rufus, and Henry. The former loud and brutal, the latter quiet and cunning. Neither has Matilda's calm wisdom, and both see the crown more as spoils than stewardship. By 1087, William is riding through Mantes, a city in revolt, setting fire to homes as a show of strength. But as he watches the flames, his horse stumbles on uneven ground, and the king is thrown against the pommel. The injury seems minor at first, but days pass and he cannot rise from bed. His belly swells. Infection blooms. He is taken to a priory near Rouen, where the once mighty conqueror lies in agony, groaning through fever dreams and muttered prayers. Servants flee, nobles squabble, and William the King, who reshaped England, who defied legitimacy and rewrote lineage, now fights a different kind of war, the one against time. It is said that in his final hours he confessed to the brutality of his reign, that he wept, that he asked to be buried beside Matilda. but the truth remains blurred. Some monks claimed he died raging, screaming for a crown none could give. Others insisted he asked forgiveness of the church and bequeathed his English throne to William Rufus, sparking one of history's most bitter sibling wars. Even his burial, like Matilda's, is haunted by scandal. His body is brought to Caen to be interred in the abbey he founded the male counterpart to Matilda's La Trinité. But the coffin proves too small. The bloated corpse will not fit. As monks and knights watch in horrified silence, the body is forced into the sarcophagus. A terrible cracking sound echoes through the church as William's stomach bursts. The scent drives away the mourners. It is a grotesque end for a man who once ruled with precision and fear. No queen weeps beside him. No wife whispers final blessings. The grave swallows him without ceremony, and yet she remains. Matilda. Even in absence, she shadows the fall of her husband's empire, for it is through her that the realm remembers its better nature. It is through her abbeys that the people continue to pray. It is through her letters, her daughters, her influence on Robert, that echoes of a gentler dynasty persist. The myth of the conqueror will endure, etched in stone, taught in classrooms, lauded in battle songs. But the legacy of the queen lies elsewhere, in the parchment yellowed by time, in the threadbare altar cloth embroidered by her hand, in the hush of prayer beneath her tomb, and above all, in the questions she leaves behind. What does it cost a woman to stand beside a tyrant and not become one herself? How does a queen speak when history only listens for war? And who remembers the architect of peace when the world celebrates only conquest? These are the threads that linger in the wake of Matilda's death. Not grand, not loud, but unbreakable. In the years after William's death, his empire cracks and bleeds like a wound never stitched. The sons who remain, the hot-blooded William Rufus, the calculating Henry, and the estranged Robert, tear at their father's legacy like wolves at a carcass. England is plunged into civil unrest. Normandy stumbles beneath its own crown. And yet even in this violent fracturing, Matilda's memory refuses to fade. She becomes something else now. No longer just a queen consort, she is a symbol, revered, manipulated, rewritten by chroniclers who once dismissed her. At La Trinité, her resting place becomes a site of pilgrimage. Some come to pray. Others come to gawk to wonder at the woman who had once shared the bed and the ambition of the conqueror. Over time, her bones become relics, not of a ruler, but of an idea, the stillness that might have softened a storm. But even her grave is not left in peace. In the centuries that follow, war after war will thunder across Normandy. The abbey is damaged, rebuilt, damaged again. The revolution desecrates her tomb. Her original sarcophagus is shattered. Her remains are scattered, gathered, relocated, mislabeled. The bones of a queen reduced to inventory. Some say a single bone fragment housed today in a modest casket beneath a simple slab is all that remains of Matilda of Flanders. Others claim even that is uncertain, but the truest trace of her lives elsewhere, in the margins of illuminated manuscripts where her name is still faintly visible. In the inheritance of her daughters, each one married to power-shaping courts across Europe, like seeds cast into far soil. In the whispered rumours that she, not William, ruled in shadow. That his victory at Hastings was not just sharpened by steel, but steeled by her belief in him. Some historians argue Matilda was merely a consort devoted, capable, but ultimately passive in the face of her husband's war machine. Others paint her as a strategist in silk, the iron thread in the tapestry of Norman Conquest. What is undeniable is this no Queen of England before her wielded power with such subtlety. When Robert rebels again, this time against his brother William Rufus, it is to Matilda's memory that he appeals. He invokes their mother's last wishes, her dream of unity. But England is no longer a land of memory. It is a land of ambition, and dreams, no matter how noble, burn quickly in such a place. Robert fails. He loses Normandy, then his freedom. Henry, his youngest brother, eventually imprisons him for life. It is said that in the stone halls where Robert dies, he keeps a scrap of cloth once embroidered by Matilda, a gift from his mother, stained, frayed, folded and unfolded 100 times. We do not know if this is true, but it feels true, because even after her voice is silenced, Matilda continues to speak through gesture, through legacy, through the sorrow of sons shaped too long by war and not long enough by love. What she built her abbeys, her daughters. Her diplomacy is overshadowed by the brutality of the men she stood beside. Yet hers is the ghost that lingers longest. Not in conquest, but in the quiet, in the breath between battles. There is no coronation song for Matilda, no grand statue, no epic poem written in her name. But there is something more enduring. A queen remembered not for how she ruled, but for how she held the crown steady while kings threatened to drop it. As the 12th century dawns, new queens rise in England. Some will fight, some will fall. All will follow in the shadow of the woman who once dared to hold both sword and silence in balance. She remains like a thread woven deep into the cloth never seen, but if pulled, the entire tapestry unravels. In the final years of her life, Matilda walks slowly through the gardens of Caen. Her steps quieter, her form slighter, yet her presence still commanding. The court she once filled with music and policy now speaks more often in hushed tones. Her daughters have married into thrones. Her sons plot and battle. William grows crueler with age, consumed by the weight of his empire and the betrayals of his blood. But Matilda, long used to navigating the tempests of kings, finds a strange clarity in this autumn of her rule. Her influence is no longer drawn from proximity to power. It is power distilled through memory, wielded with restraint and ritual. She begins to withdraw from the ceremonial chambers and enters more deeply into the life of the abbey she built with her own hands and prayers. La Trinité becomes her true court, and the nuns her new council. She spends her days in contemplation, prayer and governance of the monastic lands, still overseeing accounts, still listening to petitions. She is no longer the Queen of England. She is Madame Abbess, the matron of a kingdom of silence. It is here, far from the clamour of war, that she begins to write letters again. Not proclamations nor treaties, but personal notes. To her daughters, to Robert, to the abbots she once sparred with overland and loyalty. The words that remain fragments, preserved like fragile leaves, reveal a woman torn between past and present. I have outlived too much, she writes in one. But even in this slow withdrawal, Matilda does not surrender to irrelevance. In fact, her final political act comes in the form of mediation. As William threatens to disinherit Robert entirely, it is Matilda who intervenes. She begs her husband for clemency, not out of maternal sentiment, but for the sake of the realm. A divided house, she warns, will fall. William listens, but only partly. He reinstates Robert as heir to Normandy, but not England. It is a compromise, and it is Matilda's. Yet such small victories come at a cost. Her health begins to fail. Some say it is grief. Others whisper of slow poisoning of a court that long grew restless under a queen who would not fade quietly. When her final illness comes, it arrives not like a tempest, but like dusk, slow certain swallowing everything in shadows. She is attended not by her husband away campaigning in Maine, nor by her sons, but by her sisters in the abbey. And still, even as her body weakens, she insists on signing final charters. She dictates donations to the poor. She gifts relics to La Trinité. She settles disputes among noble houses that once knelt at her throne. There is a legend that in her last hours Matilda asked to be wrapped not in the royal cloth of England, but in the simple linen of a nun, that she wished to be buried not in ceremony, but in humility. Some claim this is apocryphal, a pious embellishment. But if true, it would be the final act of a woman who knew the difference between crown and conscience. When the news of her death reaches William, the king is not at court. He is at war again. Chroniclers say he received the message in silence, then turned his horse without a word and rode away from the battlefield. He does not attend her funeral. Others argue he could not. The war made travel impossible, but whispers persisted that the man who once laid siege to kingdoms for her hand could not face the empty bed she left behind. Matilda is buried at La Trinité, beneath a simple stone that reads, "Here lies the noble Matilda, wife of William the Conqueror, who reigned in England." No mention of her birth, no mention of her own rule, just her marriage, just the man. But the abbey remembers. The nuns pass on her legend. The townspeople tell stories of a queen who walked among them without guards, who knelt beside them in prayer, who once handed out bread with her bare hands during a famine. She becomes myth, Not the kind wrapped in golden laurels, but the kind stitched into lace and ink and memory. A soft myth, a fierce one. Some say her ghost still walks the stone corridors of La Trinité, trailing the scent of lavender and ink. Others say she lives on only in the bloodlines of queens yet unborn. But all agree on one thing. She was the last stillness before England erupted, the last candle before the wind, the last queen who believed in peace before the men tore it apart. Matilda is gone. And with her, the last tether holding William's rage in check seems to snap. The conqueror, once tempered by a wife who whispered reason into his fire, now rules alone. His grief does not weep, it burns. The halls of Normandy and England grow colder, stricter. Punishments lengthen. Mercy becomes rare. Even his loyal courtiers begin to fear the tremble in his voice when her name is spoken. But it is not just sorrow that haunts him. It is the storm he cannot stop from brewing between his sons. 3 sons, 3 crowns, 1 broken legacy. Robert the eldest, once Matilda's favourite, now finds himself stranded between the shadow of his father's power and the ghost of his mother's protection. He has ruled Normandy in name, but with no true authority. William, ever mistrustful, has withheld full governance, sending spies in place of advisors and orders in place of support. Robert resents this. He was promised a crown, but what he holds feels like a leash. The tension explodes in 1079, barely 2 years after Matilda's death, when Robert raises a rebellion against his father. It is not his first act of defiance, but it is the most daring. The son of William the Conqueror takes arms against the very king whose name once shook empires. And then, in a forest near Gerberoi, fate twists the knife. Father and son clash unrecognized in the chaos of battle, and Robert strikes William down. Blood seeps from a wound beneath the king's eye, and only a desperate cry from a nearby knight halts Robert's sword before it kills his father outright. William survives humiliated. Robert flees exiled, and the realm whispers, the king has been wounded by his own blood. Some say this broke William's spirit more than any war. Others believe it fed a deeper bitterness, one that would rot the dynasty from within. Either way, the breach between father and son becomes a chasm, one that no treaty can mend. Matilda, had she lived, might have stitched it closed with her careful diplomacy. But in her absence, the wound festers. Then there is William Rufus, the second son. Not meant to be king, not groomed for peace. He is sharp-edged and restless, loyal only to ambition. When William the Conqueror lies dying in 1087, it is not Robert who receives the crown of England, it is Rufus. Normandy goes to Robert, England to Rufus. The empire Matilda once dreamed of as a singular inheritance is torn in 2 parcelled like livestock. And with it, the seeds of civil war are sown. Some say this was William's punishment for Robert. Others argue it was pragmatic division, an effort to prevent conflict by giving each son a piece of the legacy. But in truth, it is a gamble, and history is rarely kind to divided crowns. The youngest son, Henry, stands in the shadows watching. Quiet, educated, underestimated. He inherits no land, only money. But he is the one who waits and watches and learns, the child of both William's force and Matilda's foresight. And though his time has not yet come, his presence will cast a long cold silhouette over the thrones of his brothers. In the years that follow, the empire becomes a chessboard of betrayal. Robert sells Normandy's future to finance a failed crusade. William Rufus rules England with a clenched fist, his court rife with scandal, his enemies silenced with gold or blood. And Henry, always watching, keeps his silence until the day he strikes. The legacy Matilda helped build is not shattered in a single moment. It crumbles slowly under the weight of sibling rivalry and patriarchal stubbornness. The empire she envisioned was not just political, it was personal. A fusion of her Flemish diplomacy and William's Norman fire. But what survives her is division. Her sons, instead of continuing her legacy, become mirrors of the men around them. Warriors first, rulers second, and brothers last. And yet even in this unravelling, echoes of Matilda persist. Robert still prays at La Trinité when passing through Caen. William Rufus, though, cruel, mimics some of his mother's administrative structures, efficient, ruthless, but effective. And Henry, who will one day wear both crowns of Normandy and England, builds his rule on both fear and reform, a strange echo of the mother he barely remembers. but the scars left by her absence run deep. Even William the Conqueror in his final days is said to have spoken her name. Not as a king calls a queen, but as a man remembers the only person who ever calmed his storms. When he dies bloated and broken in Rouen, no queen stands at his bedside. No son weeps openly. His body is abandoned for hours by the nobles who once bowed before him. It is not until a poor knight takes pity that his corpse is carried to Caen, and even then during the burial his tomb cracks. The stonework collapses. The body will not fit. Some call it divine retribution, others an omen, but one detail remains: he is buried not beside his crown, not beside his sword, but near the abbey Matilda built, near the woman who once tamed the conqueror, together in stone if not in peace.